what's everybody drinking? I already, spilled the beans that I've got this like beautiful martini. My boyfriend Jack made it. It is sort of hitting me like rocket fuel, but that's what I'm drinking. Matt, what are you drinking?
You asked me?
Yep, Matt.
Known as Matt. I am drinking a dirty martini, but a shout out to my partner, who is the mixologist between the two of us, and is away for the weekend. So I'm drinking a martini that I made, and it's terrible. It does the trick. It's doing the trick. What about you, Kyler? What are you drinking?
So my go-to is gin. So this is a classic gin and tonic with a twist. So there is this cranberry-infused gin, which is delicious. My partner gifted it to me, and I am the luckiest man alive.
I think, Kyler, I noticed when I talk to folks about sociology, sometimes there are terms we take for granted that don't always translate well. So when you say you're a sociologist, what does that mean? And when you say you're a demographer, what does that mean? Can you just kind of like boil it down for us?
Sure. So I think it's kind of interesting. So when I think of a sociologist, I think of someone who studies social life broadly defined. And so there's no sector of society that's above or beyond what sociologists can look at. And so that's how I define a sociologist, right? When it comes to demography, it's the statistical study of human populations, but I consider myself a little d demographer. Like I'm not really interested in the big, the demographic processes of fertility, mortality, and immigration. I just use kind of like the demographic perspective in my approach to understanding society, which is more generalizability, population level. What can you say about a large group of people? Right, that's how I define it.
So it sounds like you know how to do math.
Well, Stata, the statistical software that I use, knows how to do math.
I think, Sarah, we need to be sponsored by Stata at some point. We need to explore what that sponsorship would look like. I think that's that could be the first YouTube sponsorship we'll ever have. That would be terrific.
As people who never use Stata.
I actually love Stata.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I never numbers. So I'm like, okay, I didn't know that about you.
I'm a qualitative person, but I trained with Cynthia Feliciano, who does quantitative work. And so I know how to do the basics. Don't call me a quantitative researcher, but I can do a regression.
In grad school, I actually recorded a rap song it's praising Stata. It's called Regress It. I'm Kid Kurtosis, and it's with Missing Data Elliott and Ben Coefficient. It's to Missy Elliott's Work It. It's called Regress It. It's awesome.
I'm familiar. Wow. Yeah. Okay. I don't know that. How can we get better than? I feel like we need to have you back to do a live performance of that.
Well, and this is our second guest who has like a musical performance background. We can have like a talent show of our guests.
People are very excited about this in the chat. I'm just going to point that out very briefly. Okay.
Wait. Aaron Palace, the danger in getting Stata as a sponsor is that it would reshape the series.
Aaron. Okay, I can't get it. Okay. Oh, regrouping. All right, we're back on track. We're back on the script.
Well, I guess one way I would say into kind of this narrative of race being biological, what are the races? Like, give me the name of like the concrete list of races. And you probably can, but it changed over time. And there used to be a period of time when we had 5 races, then there were 7. Look at the census; it changes every 10 years. What kind of questions we ask? So that in of itself should indicate there's something up with this biological notion of race. We can't even decide what those definitions are. The other thing is that when the Irish and Southern Italians migrated to the United States, they were considered non-white. Immigrants from Mexico the characterization of them being white versus non-white changed depending on how many migrants there were and whether we wanted to stem the flow of migrants. So the definitions have changed over time. They're meaningless, quite frankly. And again, if we look at antiquity, the concept of race didn't really exist in the conventional way. It wasn't really until we had this seaborne empire and conquering other lands that we actually created these racial categories to justify some of the atrocities that people did, right? It's easier to say that all men are created equal if Black people weren't human, right? And so there are these creations of these categories that are not really based in biology. Now, it is fair to say that there are physical characteristics that we give meaning to. So because of the skin color, I'm classified as being Black. So in that sense, race is based on some kind of objective reality of what someone inherits from their genes, but that's completely a socially constructed idea. No, I think this is important. I think this is where education is so important. So connecting the dots really, I think, means articulating to policymakers that race is a social construct, that there are not these genetic determinants that are really causing these health disparities. And then also going back to the other question about health, so the World Health Organization defines health as being not merely the absence of disease. It actually defines health as being psychological, social, emotional well-being in addition to physical well-being. So I think it just really involves redefining what it means to be healthy. And then also really having a strong sense of what these racial categories really are and what their use are in terms of explaining health outcomes.
Can you give us a quick definition of phenotype, just for anyone who may be unfamiliar as to what that means?
Yeah. So the way I like to do it, so I'm not handy at all, but I'll use like architecture references. I don't even know if it's art. Anyway, I use the blueprint versus what you actually get. So the genotype is like the blueprint, and then the phenotype is what's actually out there. So we all have a particular type of, in our genetic code, we have these genes that are marked for certain things, but the phenotype is what actually appears. So like in my family, my great grandmother was an Irish woman, right? She was mixed, but she passed as white. She was an Irish woman who married a really dark-skinned Black man, and so there's some people in my family that have really light green eyes, others that don't. So, but we all have that in our genotype. It's just what is expressed. If you're a white male physician, telling a Black woman that she needs to do all of these things to better her health, you're not really taking into account her context. You're not taking into account her lived experience. That person's not going to listen to you. So when it comes to things like adherence to treatment plans, adherence to drugs, adherence to whatever, that's already going to fall apart if physicians don't have that type of exposure, that training to be able to understand the context. People always talk about like the training that police officers are receiving and how problematic that training is. I think that we need to look at health more critically to see how that training also perpetuates violence against people of color. There was a study that looked at people who are going into medical school versus those who graduate from medical school. And it polled them in terms of it tested their implicit bias, right? Pre-med education, post-med education. And it found that students who were entering into the program held less implicit bias about their patients than when they graduated from their program. So there's something about medical training that actually perpetuates these ideas. And, we can probably think about the whole idea that when you're a physician, you're trying to sort people, understand who's at risk, who's not at risk. There may be some of that's kind of impacting their biases or their judgments about who's more at risk of certain diseases, but ultimately ends up hurting their ability to treat patients adequately. So there's something about medical training that really does, I think, perpetuate this mistreatment. There have been some things that looked at medical textbooks and show that, there's a very vivid example of textbooks that look at skin diseases, and they only use white bodies to show skin diseases. And so they only have practice diagnosing skin diseases based on these photos of white people. There have been issues with cadavers and studying cadavers and having a majority white cadavers to examine as opposed to diverse. And to be fair, part of that comes from the fact that a lot of times Black people don't like to donate their bodies to science, but that's also rooted in mistrust in the medical system. I mean, Tuskegee, anyone? So, it's a really complicated issue. But I think that we do need to take a critical look at medical training and see what is being done there, what's being perpetuated, because there's certainly a problem there.
Wondering if Dr. Sherman Wilkins has thoughts about the White House issuing the first ever proclamation on Black maternal health.
So thoughts in terms of what? What I would say is anytime the federal government is acknowledging a very real health disparity, good, right? Absolutely, that's awesome. So I actually haven't heard, I haven't read this proclamation. There's been a lot going on in the news right now, so don't hold me to. But what I would say is one of the things that I really feel is needed is more acknowledgement by policymakers and politicians that we actually have a problem. When people talk about improving health or improving health outcomes, that's great. That's a really good goal, but we really need to be more targeted and specific by what we mean, right? I think that talking about Black maternal health, given the fact that Black women are dying disproportionately during childbirth and delivering low birth weight babies, is really an important step. That being said, I'm very critical of the Biden or any kind of administration because I think words and actions they need to align. So anyone can put out a proclamation or say something or and commit to something, but are you really doing it? We've had the federal government has had healthy people initiatives, which is an initiative that every 10 years they revisit to eliminate health disparities. And we've been having that every single decade. And we've seen some changes, but we have not seen nearly as much change as we need in terms of eliminating those disparities. So that will be a prime example of how we put these statements out there that are really important, but whether it actually, moves the needle in a substantive way is a really big question. And so, maybe Biden will also embrace Medicare for all. That would be a really good way to address the maternal health issue of Black women.
So I want to take a moment for everybody to send some celebratory messages for Kyler for taking some time to be with us, sharing about his work. This was super fun for our inaugural,
Yeah.
Jesus, wait. Our inaugural episode. I have had a blast. This has been really fun, and I want to thank you, Kyler, for being a part of it. So thank you. Thank you so much.